here we are today. We're going to talk a little bit about seed starting. Now, it's kind of late for seed starting, but I see a lot of people are starting some of their seeds now, some of their tomatoes. So it's just, should I say it's sort of late for tomatoes and peppers. You have a few more days. If you get them in and you're really good at seed starting, you can make it work. So we'll kind of talk about it. Just a few quick tips on how to make that work best. So first of all, start out with a good seed starting mix. Something that's made for seed starting, something that's brand new and sterile because some fungi can grow or fungus grows in and can damage your plants at first. So you want to start out with that. You also want to start out with clean seed starting trays. I personally love these little hexagon ones, but there's an awful lot in here for doing seed starting. So you might think about a couple different things when you're choosing seed starting trays. If you're going to do a lot of different things, you might look at some of the smaller options. Like this is actually a little option that you can use where it's got the little pellets that go inside of it, but there's only a dozen in here. So you can plant a dozen plants in there. Now you do have the option of using a big tray like this, and you can plant all your different things and mark where they go. But the only challenge with that is everything that you plant is going to germinate at a different rate. Even two different tomatoes or pop up at a different rate. So that presents a challenge when you have one thing that's up and running and then you have other things that aren't, because you're going to want to get these under more light as they start to grow, and if some things haven't popped up, it's going to kind of be a variance there though. So I really don't like to mix things in trays too often. What I'll do a lot of times when I'm growing a bunch of things like these tomatoes here is I'll add something in that I've got extra seeds for, like basil, and I know basil pops pretty fast. So I'll put that in the leftover. So I ran out of tomato seeds, and I just added some basil in. So that kind of works because who doesn't like basil? So first you start. We know we've got good soil. We've got clean, sterile seed starting trays. If you're going to reuse trays, make sure you wash them out with hot soapy water or bleach water or hydrogen peroxide water, something to get them nice and clean, and make sure they're perfectly dry before you start your process, so that any of the bacteria or anything that's inside of them can leave. So the next thing you would do after you've got figured out you've got your soil seed starting trays, is next thing you want to do is fill up your trays. Now I didn't bring any seed starting mix and not going to do all this for you, but we've basically you want to make sure that it's topped off. You want to press it a little bit because if you can see, these will sink a little bit, so you want to just give it a little press so that it's the cells are good and full. And then what I typically will do next, after I've filled this with my soil, is I'll go through and I'll plant my seeds in that soil. So once you do that, you go plant your seeds in the soil. Now keep in mind, we're talking mostly about tomatoes and peppers because eggplants, that's the things you're going to do really early. But I'll plant them in the soil. You'll look on the back of the package, and it usually will tell you how deep to plant it. This one here says 1/8 of an inch deep. Usually the smaller the seed, the deeper, or the smaller the seed, the less soil goes on top. Some seeds are practically on the top. So once you plant all your seeds, usually put one into each cell. Then the next thing you'll do is you'll get yourself hot water. I usually get the hottest water that'll come out of the spigot. And then what I will do is I will go underneath in the tray and I'll fill it with water. Now it's a little bit of there's a little bit of hit and miss here, because what you're going to want to do is see the water, it'll wick up. You always want to water from the bottom. So you'll see the water that'll start to it'll wick up. So you're going to have to figure out, depending on what kind of soil you need, how much water you're going to want to actually put in there. So now, windowsill. That's not where you want to start your seeds, for sure. Coldest place in your house is probably the windowsill. Seeds like to germinate at a soil temperature of like 75 degrees. So you put them in the windowsill, you have freezing cold or cold soil, and it takes way longer. So if you want to jumpstart, use some hot water, and then the next thing you'll want to do is put a heating pad under it. So you're going to put a heating pad. You can buy these at the store. These are anywhere between 10 and 20 bucks. You're going to put the heating pad under it, and then you're going to put the dome on top. So essentially what you've created is an incubator. Warm inside, nice warm inside. It's going to stay moist inside here, and this creates just a little mini greenhouse to keep everything warm. So again, you don't want to go put this on the windowsill because everything's going to get cold. If you didn't have a heating pad, you might find the warmest place on your house, which is probably on top of your refrigerator. These typically don't need light to get started, but you do want to check them twice a day for when they pop, because as soon as they pop up even the most little bit smaller than this, as soon as they pop up out of the soil, they're going to need light, and they're going to need probably 16 hours of light. That's what I set my timers on. I put timers on all my indoor lights, just a pretty simple timer, and I usually will put it for about 16 hours. I really don't care what time of day it is. Since I don't like messing with timers, I just set it for about 16 hours. You're going to want the light to be as close as this. Now, this is probably the cheapest light. We got these donated. This is probably about the cheapest light you could buy. I'm going to guess it's only $20 for this light. It's a pretty simple grow light. It's got a little simple stand, but the height is really nice for these. It's only about 6 inches. You want it not closer than 6 inches usually, but not much more than like 8 or 10 inches away from them, because what happens is these are actually really nice, but they'll get really leggy and really thin if they don't have enough light or if they're reaching for light. So most of the time, a front window is not enough. Now, I'll put things in the front window after they've reached a certain size, once they start to get, like, say, this size, or put several leaves on. Because for a couple reasons, is the leaves are what catch the light. And so the more leaves on, the better they're going to be at receiving that light. So a little bit less light works a little bit better for them. But I still like to keep them on as long as I can on the lights in the daytime. I mean, not all night, because they do need a little time to rest. So we've watered from the bottom, and then we're going to talk about a little bit about how you water after the fact, once this thing's up and growing. So you're going to watch this thing, and when you see them pop, you're going to get them out in the sunlight, and you're going to keep an eye on, the early stages. You want to keep the soil pretty damp, but then after that, you're going to want to sort of let the top of the soil dry out a little bit. And what you're going to want to do is, you'll continue to feed from the bottom, but you want to let it dry out because you want this root. So look at the size of that root coming out of there. And look at the size of that plant. It's fantastic, because really what you want to do is you want to build a strong root system before this plant starts taking up all the energy. So that's perfect for that. But now I'm going to go back a little bit and talk about trays. If you are mixing a bunch of stuff, like you're limited on space and you're going to put a bunch of stuff in one tray, you can go get these ones that are in little 6-packs, and you just cut the little 6-packs apart. And then you can mark the trays, and then when this tray, like if this tray was a tomato that got that tall, these are peppers in here right now, if it was a big tall tomato, I could actually take the 6-pack out. I'd have it marked what was in this particular 6-pack. I could take the 6-pack out and put it someplace else. So always want to make sure it's got water underneath it, but you could put it in a bowl or something like that. We use that kind of stuff all the time. So that's kind of the 101 on that. And then as they get to a certain size, now if you did plant them early, and I meant to bring them some of my early plants, if you did plant them too early, because we're about 4 weeks away from where we can put them in, so these babies will be this tall just about right when it's time to go in. But if you did plant them a little bit early and you want to put them into a bigger pot, let's get a larger pot. Soil doesn't matter as much. You want soil that's light enough for the roots to go through, but you don't have to worry as much about the funguses and stuff in there. You can put them in or transplant them into a larger pot like that. So I don't know if there's anything else to talk about with these things, except maybe talk a little bit about the fan. So this is something else that will help. You can put a gentle fan on. You want it to be somewhat gentle. Really, an hour or two a day is good for the fan. And basically what it's doing is it's moving these things around, and it's making them a little bit sturdier. The other thing that's really important about the fan that it really helps out, the next thing I'm going to hear is somebody's going to talk about bugs getting on their stuff, and we have that problem. I mean, when you're in the house, you don't know where they come from, but they show up on your stuff, little white flies and stuff like that. The fan also helps with that, because most insects really don't like the wind, so they're going to stay out of it. So some of my stuff I'll leave a gentle fan on all day long, but super gentle, so it's just putting a little bit of breeze on. If you don't have a fan and you have tomatoes, this is the old school way that the old timers told me to do it. You just brush your tomato plants 10 times a day like that, and that'll do it. Now, we'll talk just a little bit about some of the late season stuff. So I see people right now planting cucumbers, planting green beans and all that inside the house. I'm not a super big fan of doing a lot of that stuff inside the house, although we do some. We're about 4 weeks ahead of the time that you want to put these babies in. So now is a pretty good time for putting this stuff. It's going to grow much faster than the tomatoes and the peppers and all that. But really, it's the same circumstance. You want to keep this stuff warm as you can keep it, and then you want to let these things grow. Make sure they're getting the same amount of light. But this stuff you can grow sometimes if you're starting it inside. You can start it a week or two ahead. I mean, it's amazing how fast things like squash shoot up out of there once you get them started. Much faster than some of this stuff. Usually for me, tomatoes take about 3 days to germinate, sometimes 2 days, and that's like you say with the warm water and all that. I will stipulate one thing. If you want to check, and you can research some of the stuff, most of the normal stuff likes the warm temperatures for soil, but if you're starting spinach inside, I'm not sure why people start spinach inside, but if you're starting spinach inside, it does not like the hot soil temps. It probably likes about 60-degree temp to germinate in, so you wouldn't be putting the hot water in and keeping that really hot. It's also got a pretty short grow season. So I think that's all the tips for today on growing, and good luck growing. If you're getting those tomatoes and peppers in, get them in right now. The other stuff you can move on, or a lot of this other stuff I just plant right in the garden. All right, that's it for today.